Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
Robert Kandell is the author of UnHidden, a book for men and those confused by them. Clever subtitle there, Robert. Now, I got my hands on this book late, but I was still able to make my way through about half of it before the interview, and it was immediately obvious by the precision with which Robert articulates the nuances of the challenges that men are facing that he is a man to listen to and trust. Now, Robert is a teacher, writer, coach, and lecturer committed to helping men find their best lives in love and in purpose. Since 2002, Robert has been on the cutting edge of inner work, leading over 10,000 people on their journeys of personal development. A big chunk of those people he helped through the business that he co-founded called OneTaste. Many of you may be familiar with that company. Now, OneTaste turned into a fast-growing 8-figure international business, which became most famous for its practice of Orgasmic Meditation, focused on women, or OMing for short. Robert left OneTaste in 2014 when he no longer agreed with the direction the business was heading so that he could focus on working with men and leaders of business. In this episode, we dive into why men keep some of the deepest parts of themselves hidden. And boy, I can relate to this for most of my life, which leads men to living lackluster intimate lives, not knowing how to ask your partner for what you really want, to having surface level friendships, and to settle for a life that doesn't inspire you. Robert tells this fascinating story of his client Libby, who is a high-end New York City escort who charges upwards of $1,000 an hour so that men can get their sexual desires and needs met. Some of these men spend up to $100,000 a year to avoid facing the potential rejection, judgment, or shaming of bringing those same desires to their wives/partners, even though these men tell Libby they would much rather be doing these things with their wives. So that preempts a conversation of how men can ask for the things they want without the guilt, the shame, or the fear of rejection, or if there is some pushback, how to sit in it. And then finally, the excuses that men make that cause you to settle for a life of mediocrity. This episode is yet another step on your journey to discover and live the great man within you. Robert, welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. It's wonderful to have you here, my friend.
Thank you so much. And I like your new title. I know you just released that, right? This week?
Yeah. It's actually about, I think, maybe 1 week or 2 weeks old now. We're getting really good play on it. You're someone, I believe, who fits that category of a man who's living the great man within himself. And you've just recently, well, not recently, I mean, late last year, released a book called UnHidden, book for men and those confused by them, where you open up the kimono on some of the stories of your life where you had to step courageously into that bigger man inside of you. So we just want to first thank you for the work that you were doing with the men and women of this world, because, you know, we're on that same path as well. And it's always awesome to see someone else like on that journey. So thank you.
My pleasure.
And it would be great if you can introduce yourself to our audience. Let us know who you are, how you got into the work that you're doing with men and with women, and then tell us a little bit about the book.
Great. I'll give you my highlights of my story, and please feel free to stop or ask more specifics. The way I like to tell my story is I was normal till I was 28. And what I mean by normal is I was living the American dream laid out to me by my father and society. Successful high school, college, got my first job, corporate America, 6-figure income, bought a house in San Francisco, married, the whole kit and caboodle, successful at 28. Also, part of the American dream was I was overweight, disconnected from my wife, we weren't having sex. All the dreams of who I'd become and all the innovation I thought I'd be as a youth was pretty much eaten up by corporate America, workaholic, the whole two sides of the coin. And then my first wife, Carol, one day said, hey, do you want to take a class on sex? And when you're not having sex with your wife and she asked to take a class, the answer is yes, which actually probably came out, yes.
I will gladly take this class with you. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea. So a few weeks later, ended up in this workshop and basically in the first 5 minutes made a total fool of myself. What happened was we were doing introductions and I was speaking and I was introducing myself and I thought I was eloquent. I thought I was smart. And I thought the class would clap and the teacher would invite me to teach with him. And instead he said, hey, do you know your wife's crying? And she was sitting a few feet away from me. And I had no awareness on her. I had no conception of how misogynistic and how chauvinistic, how little attention I had on her and my impact on her. And then the teacher, this guy, Erwan Devan, who probably be great for your show too, said the worst thing possible. He said, okay, who's next? And I had to sit in the burn of that embarrassment for hours as other people were introducing themselves. And I had two choices. I had the choice to stand up and go back to my status quo, protect myself. And the second one, the one I picked, was to sit in the burn, to sit. And it was one of those life moments of like, I want to understand this. I don't understand what's happening. It was like this deep, rich curiosity. And I sat and went for it. Years of personal development work, started an organization called OneTaste in 2004. OneTaste taught about relationship, intimacy, and sexuality. We had a practice called Orgasmic Meditation, took the company from a paper napkin sketch to an international 8-figure business in 10 years. Left in 2014, totally burnt out, totally not in agreement with the direction of the company. Sold my shares, came back to Venice Beach, California, and started this last iteration of my life, or the current iteration of my life, more specifically. Since then, I've built a coaching and CFO practice where I coach men. I also help businesses with their finances and communication, team building, and got married to my second wife. Really have done a lot of more personal development work, invested a lot in plant medicine, a lot of therapy. And then last year, 2018, published unHidden, a book for men, those confused by them, and just have been enjoying life in the embracing of the great man, to use your language, to confront all the fear and all the viewpoints, to have the life exactly the way I wanted it.
Robert, what kept you in it? So you mentioned that pivotal moment in your life. You're sitting in there, that class, and you thought you gave a great explanation, came to a realization that you weren't connected with your wife. Mm-hmm. What kept you there? I see a lot of guys, they hit the ejection button at that point. They're like, I'm good where I'm at. But you did something different.
I mean, it's funny. My wife asked me that exact question last night. And the answer was rapid curiosity. Like, I'm a geek. I really am a geek. I'm a computer programmer. That's how I started my career. I like puzzles. And I could not fathom. It was embarrassment, but it was like confusion. Like, how did that happen? Why is she crying? I was mad at her. I was mad at the teachers. I was mad at the class. And then I realized, oh, this is me. And so it was really just a deep, passionate curiosity to say, I want to understand who I am and how this happened.
I love that so much because I think the image of guys going to do work is that we come from some altruistic place of I'm going to do better for others. And the reality is most of us get into it with what you said, which is, wait a second, like something doesn't feel quite right. Let me figure this thing out.
Right.
And then the doors open up. So thanks for sharing that. That's, I'm glad you stayed in it.
Thank you.
And Robert, one of the things that you actually mentioned in the book when you're writing about this story is that you were a corporate guy, maybe you're wearing your khaki pants and your button-down shirt, and then you show up at this seminar, this sex seminar, and you were the only person who looked like you, right? And I spent 15 years in financial services, and Brian spent over a decade with Accenture, right? So also in the corporate environment, our audiences, in many cases, we have a lot of entrepreneurs, but many corporate folks as well. And then you found yourself surrounded by, guys with beard, flannel shirts, and tattoos. And I think that that's actually one of the big fears that a lot of men have, men from, let's say, our background, is to go to some of these environments where it's all the hippies, it's the effeminate guy. Like these are the labels that we give. Why do you think that guys like us, or from our past, or men who are in this position right now, have such an adversity or has such an aversion to wanting to step into those environments with the hippies, the effeminate guys, the fill in the blank, the labels?
I'll reveal myself first, and then I'll give you my viewpoint on the greater, what I've seen. So it was a mix of envy, attraction, and lack of understanding, because those guys could be flamboyant. I still am kind of nerdy in my dress. Like I'm still not a hippie. My hair is short. My beard gets a little crazy, not much. I'm still, if you look at me, I'm still, corporate looking. It was a envy on some level. It was a desire to feel more confident in myself, to wear my hair long or to be flamboyant or to be loud. I was always the guy on the edge of the playground looking in the other kids with their wildness, wanting to be like that. And so I think a lot of guys, because they're not in touch with their own desires, have to be, quote, right, unquote, and then build judgment to separate themselves from that. In other words, if I can't be that, then they have to be wrong.
That's fascinating, Robert. And one of the things that Brian and I were just talking about this morning before we all jumped on this recording was there's a book that just came out this week by one of our friends. Her name is Cleo Stiller, and she wrote the book Modern Manhood, which is a fantastic book. Conversations about the complicated world of being a good man today. And one of the pieces of research that she came across was men bond through creating an us group and a them group. And I think about how I was raised. It was always like on sports teams, my team is going to crush your team. The other team or anyone that's not on our team is the enemy, us against the world. And locker room talk comes from us bonding on the lowest common denominator about girls or women and what we want to do to them or what body appendage is standing out from their end. And that creates an us versus them. And it's actually one of the weird ways that we actually find a sense of community is by creating a them thing. And so like what I heard you say is it almost is quite similar is like this group of men has a sort of freedom that's outside of the traditional role of what men are supposed to be. I can't be like that. Therefore, like I'm going to find a way to reject them.
Exactly. What is our greatest fear? Our greatest fear is abandonment. I think everyone has a fear of dying alone, broke under a bridge. I mean, I think that's one of those core beliefs. And so what do? We do everything we can not to be rejected by the tribe, not to be rejected by our peers, because we're so deeply afraid of being alone, which of course is connected to external validation, which I think we'll talk about in a bit. But the point is just like our just fear of not belonging. And I know when I was in high school, like I emulated all the jocks. They were my heroes. I put them on pedestals and I watched them because they were successful with the other high school girls. Not that they treated them very well, but they were still successful. The nice guy, friends, somewhat even a little effeminate guys didn't have the success. So what do? We try to be more like the people we want to be like. And in doing so, what did I do? I sold my soul. I did it so many times in my life and then realized at some point I was like, fuck this. I'm just going to be me and then see what happens. And all of a sudden, the genuine, intimate people that I truly could be myself with arose. And that was a magical experience.
It's funny that it's like the most obvious advice of be yourself. I mean, I'm pretty sure the genie from Aladdin told Aladdin that. Right? Be yourself. And it just seems like, well, great. Like, what is that? And I hope part of the conversation we get into today is how do we actually start to define that?
Yeah.
Because I think, Robert, you went from a place of like, what is this? And curiosity and like, to now I'm defining who I actually want to be.
Right.
Let's get really specific around that, right? Because it is very easy to say, be yourself. And then everyone applauds you when you say that. And then when the rubber meets the road, then that's where like we either make the decision to actually be ourselves or not. So a very specific example that you talk about in the book, there's a chapter that's titled $100,000 to avoid intimacy. And you have a client named Libby. Please tell us that story because I think this really highlights one of the areas that men are most afraid of being rejected. And we go and do a lot of weird shit to avoid that fear of rejection.
Totally. So just so you know, Libby is a client. That's not her real name. I overtly got permission for her to tell this story. And she's one of the most interesting people I'd ever met as a coach. So she was a high-end New York City escort, $800,000, $1,200 an hour as an escort.
$800 to $1,000 an hour?
Yeah, depending on what the guy or the client wanted. So $800 to $1,200 an hour as an escort. She made a lot more money than I did, a lot more money than any coach I ever made, basically. And she was also a PhD student in English literature at Yale. Okay, so you can kind of get the flavor of who this person is. And she loved it. She had no shame about being an escort. She felt her empowerment, her sexuality. She felt the service she gave to people, men and women, mostly men, some couples, some women, but mostly men. She felt the service she was providing, a space where a man could come and be all of who he is. One time she said to me the most interesting thing. She said, most men would rather do with their wives what they're doing with me. And I was like, really? Because I was thinking like a 50, 60-year-old power guy, the wife in her 40s or 50s. And I compared myself to her, this, sexy, young, flashy, sassy woman. And she's like, yeah, they want to mix the sexuality and intimacy with love that they have with their wife. But because their wives are so closed off, because they're not even interested in listening, the husbands would sneak around, pay her that $800 to $1,200 an hour to meet with her once or twice a week. And so we did the math and we figured out it was basically $100,000 a year, which is probably not a lot of money for some of these guys, but $100,000 a year just because they couldn't say to the wife, hey, I have these fetishes, I have these desires, I want to play with BDSM, I want to play with sex parties, like, can we talk about it? But because they felt no freedom to be themselves, they had to pay $100,000 to hire Libby to satisfy this part of themselves.
This is such a fascinating story, Robert. And for those of you guys who are listening who are like, oh, that doesn't relate to me, $100,000, I'd never do that. Well, a proxy for that could be porn, right? It's like the thing that you want in porn, in your sexual relationships that you're not getting, whether it's from your dedicated partner, or maybe if you're a single man and something that you haven't been able to establish with the sexual partner, the easy way is to go and get that via porn. So one of the things that Brian and I talk about is when it comes to men, we're really good at going out and getting our needs met, but we're not always great at asking for what we want.
Right.
And this is like your story hits the nail on the head, where these men would much rather mix intimacy and sexuality and love, but the fear of being rejected or judged by their partner, or maybe inflaming their partner, is such a scary proposition that they'll go and sneak around, put their relationship at risk, and pay six figures to someone that they don't have an intimate, loving relationship. So what do we do about that, Robert? Like, how do we change those behaviors, especially when there's so much fear and so much at stake?
So I have a framework, but the first thing I want to say is this is not just a guy's fault. This is everyone's fault. We've all co-created this. And just know, as much as you withhold from your partner, I would bet your partner withholds from you. Right. So this is the system we're in. And women often say overt and covert things that trigger a man's fear. Oh, I could never say I had desire for this woman at work, or I got turned on by the barista, or I have homosexual fantasies. I can never say that because she'll leave me and end up alone under a bridge by myself. So just know that we're very attuned. We're protecting ourselves. And the second thing I want to say is this is not just obviously about sex. This is everything. This could be your work purpose. You could travel, food. It's not just sexuality. There's so much pressure to wear the mask of what's accepted that we hide so much from people we call our most intimate partners. So it's a big ecosystem in itself. What we can do about it is there's a cycle in the book that we might talk about how to solve any problem, basically. But the first thing to do is really just to confront the problem. If, as a man, you're not willing to say, my addiction to porn, or my seeing of escorts, or my overeating, or my fantasy life isn't a problem, then you're not going to do anything. And maybe it isn't a problem. But if you know there's an itch, there's a little voice that says, hey, this is not as optimal, as not amazing as I want, then you have to commit to it. Then I recommend you research it. Do your own work to see the impact on porn, or how to speak to your partner. We live in the most information-rich time in history, getting more and more rich. Podcasts like this, or books. There's no shortage of information, so research. And the third thing is just to commit. you have to say to yourself, it's more important to me to be transparent with my partner than it is to hide. It's more important for me to increase the intimacy than to take the safe way out, the easy way out. And so it's really a step of committing. Then the next step is to go to your partner and say, I want to tell you something. Can we have a conversation later? She'll probably go, what? Tell me what is it? What is it? Tell me. Like, what is it? She might get a little agitated, but you say like, no, let's just have a conversation. Then you set up the space where you can have intimacy. No phones, no music, no kids, no distractions. Sit in an intimate way that's appropriate. Maybe hold hands or face-to-face. And the first thing to do is to apologize, which is counterintuitive, right? But it's you apologize. Honey, I'm going to tell you something about myself in a moment. And I'm telling this to you because I want to be closer to you. I want to be more intimate. I want you to know everything about me. And I realized that my withholding this for the last 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 years has created a chasm in our intimacy, a block. And the reason I didn't tell you was just because I was afraid. I was afraid of rejection. I was afraid of being seen. I was afraid of what you would think. And I just want to let you know I'm sorry. Hopefully she'll say, okay, what is it? And then you say the thing. You say the thing in as little words as possible. You don't make excuses for it. You just say, I've been watching a lot of porn, or I've been cheating on my diet, or I've been seeing an escort, whatever it is. You just say it, and then you stop speaking. And then you let her react to it. And then you react to her reaction, and then she reacts to your reaction, to her reaction. And then you start to have a dialogue. And that dialogue might take a day, a week, a month, but you stay in it with the goal of increasing the intimacy. And that's how you can tell your partner anything. I'm not guaranteeing she'll stay. Matter of fact, she might leave, but isn't it more important to be true and honest with a person than some facade of what you've created?
Robert, what do you tell guys that, and I've had similar conversations to this with friends who have been in relationships for 10, 15 years, and they would love to have these conversations, but that fear that you're speaking of, I'm going to be alone under a bridge, right, is too much to rock the boat, to get to a place of like, and we're talking about, let's say we were talking about a sexual fantasy, and this guy said, I would love in my lifetime to have a threesome.
Great.
But I am not going to bring that to my wife because I don't want to rock the boat. We've got 2 kids and there's no reason to do that. I don't need it that bad. What do you say to a guy like that?
Then accept your mediocrity. Then just like accept your mediocrity. Just like say out loud, I am going to have a mediocre relationship.
The supposition is that if we're not willing to go to risk that, to put that on the line,
right,
then we actually can't have the connected relationship that's possible.
Right. Well, check out this math. If I lie to you and you buy the lie, I can't trust you.
Yeah,
because
right.
I know you're relating to the facade I created and you don't really know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
So every time we lie, we create distance between us and that person we lied to. Every little baby lie, every great lie, we know in our system that we're withholding. And we know on some level it's mediocre. Now, mediocre is not bad in society. I'm not saying mediocre is bad. I'm just saying don't fool yourself. You're in a mediocre relationship.
Robert, I love that you challenge men to say, hey, just accept your mediocrity. What you just said about, I can't trust you when I lie to you and you buy the lie. Being someone who was in Sex Addicts Anonymous for 4 years and the series of events that led up to that point, I had a public life, a public Dominic and a private Dominic.
Right.
The public Dominic was the one that I thought that everyone wanted to see. That was what was acceptable. That was what would give me love. And the women who got closest to me in my romantic relationships, the closer they got to me, but they were only really in love with the public Dominic, I started to resent them for the fact that you only loved the best version of me, but if you really knew the real me, and that was all my own doing. Everything you're saying is really landing here. And going back to this framework that you just provided of creating a container, making sure that the space is set appropriately, and not when she asks you right now, was it like to actually say, hang on, we're going to do this later, no phones, everything. So important. And I also think it could be really helpful to even go further on one of the things you said about it could take not just one conversation, but it could be a week, it could be a month, it could be a long period of time, because for most men that we've worked with, we expect there's some unconscious expectation. I'm going to have this conversation once, the problem is going to be solved. We're never going to have to deal with it again. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah,
I love the laugh that's coming with this.
Yeah, men really do think that, we are instant gratification junkies, right? We're just like, okay, check that off the list. And then we don't know that there's waves of repercussions and impacts. There's just so much more. And your partner might feel something in moment one, and then a day later, another thing pops up, and then a father wound pops up or an ex-boyfriend wound. And just know that, we pay the price for our gender with our partners. We're paying the price of all their historical interactions from father up to last boyfriend or current boyfriend or boss. Every man who's diminished or distanced her, touched her inappropriately, on some level, we are the embodiment of that guy. And so when we, in our guyness, in our humanness, being human, touch something in her past, we're going to inflame that anger. And again, you have two choices. Option number one is you dominate and try to push her into a box or leave. Option number two is just like, okay, I apologize for my humanness, and I'm curious about what impact it has on you. Let's explore all our dark edges together in a conscious way, in a deliberate way, but let's show all of it so we don't have to hide from each other. We can actually be ourselves in each other's company.
Love it.
Robert, I love people we often hear, no matter what topic that we're on, whether it's sex or relationships or work relationships, people always say, well, communication's the answer. And it's such a catch-all. It's such a surface level piece. And what you're describing here is actually the container and the level of depth that call it communication needs to go to actually explore. And I think something Dominic and I talk often about is that guys are constantly in a energy saving state. Right? We're trying to save and be efficient. And these conversations, while they do provide a level of intimacy and connection, they are not easy and they do take time. And just knowing that up front, that this is not a quick fix, it's really important.
Totally. Because if you're not willing to put the time, it's a choice. Do you want to put your time and energy in hitting the fastball or the golf ball? Do you want to put time and energy into making money and having a car? Where do you want to put your time and attention? It's really just your priority. I was obsessed with the book. I wrote the book in a year. I put my time and energy into it. And I knew I had to show up as a husband, as a father for my kids. And so finding that balance. And there were days I'm just like, I want to write. And I'm like, this is family day. And for me, just to turn my attention and just be like, the book will be there. It's okay. I had to coach myself to be like, it'll be all right. So the point is that it's just where you put your time and attention and intention for the mastery of your life. This is all about your mastery. This is all about you becoming the most, I think you call it the great man. I use the word mastery of a man approaching expertise in all elements, because I think that's the incredible pursuit to, I listened to a podcast of yours about when you die, it's the man you are compared to the man you could have been. To me, mastery is approaching always the man you think you can be.
Yes. And to tie that together with Brian's point about men being this, we are oftentimes looking for energy conservation, right? Like, what is the most efficient, most effective way? Listening to someone speak, is this worth it? Is this worth it? Is this worth it? What's the point? Is this worth it? And some of these conversations that we're talking about that could catapult you from that life of mediocrity into a place of like, this is the great man, can require a lot of energy. And I remember, as you're both speaking, when I ended up in Sex Addicts Anonymous because I had betrayed my girlfriend at the time, the one woman who I'd ever really fallen in love with. I didn't actively bring this to her, right? Like she discovered me by going through my cell phone, and now it's on the table. And to restore that relationship required lots of emotional situations, lots of containers like you described, Robert. And there were moments where there were periods of time, like stretches of time where things were great. For 2 weeks, we were so deep and so intimate because we'd broken down all of those barriers and the lovemaking was exceptional. And I thought that the problem was solved and we were over that hurdle. And then one day she would come home and all of the pain from the past would have hit her in that moment. And boom, we'd be right back in it, revisiting it as if we've never had those conversations before.
Right.
And
were you aware of the time that that wasn't just you? My hypothesis, because of my experiences in coaching men, is that pain 2 weeks later was inspired by you. You're not innocent in any shape or form, but that was betrayal by the other men in her life. That was betrayal by some other boyfriend or some other father. So that's who we are. And if we want to be in a deep, intimate relationship with a woman, the oath, the solemn oath I ask men to take is you have to love all of her, all parts of her. And that includes the parts of you that trigger the historical parts of her, to be a safe space, to have deep presence and awareness, to say, bring it, baby. I want to know all of you. That's to master a relationship with a woman. You have to take all of her, not just the parts that are easy, sexy, that you like.
I would love to dive into an example of your life where you did that, Robert, where in the book you talk about there was a time where Carol, who was, I believe, your first wife, is that correct?
Yes.
Right? She went to a 2-week seminar, came home, and then said, I've fallen in love with another man.
Yeah.
There was a time where this is the rubber meets the road. This is your test. How were you able to embrace that?
I went a little insane. This is quite early in my trainings. I was messy. I was mad. I was frustrated. We paid $20,000 for this 3-week course, each of us, to go with this group called the Welcome Consensus in the outreaches of Northern California. And basically, it was about stroking, genital stroking. It was about relationship. It was about intimacy. And the guy in charge was this guy named RJ. And RJ was like a Vietnam vet, an outdoorsman, like a manly man, brilliant with sight, had sex with thousands of women. Like he was just the man. And I was this yuppie, had sex with maybe 5 women in my life, 6 women in my life at this point, and so jealous. Anyway, Carol goes for this 3-week course that I paid $20,000 for, and she falls in love with RJ. She falls in love with my teacher.
So many RJs.
Yeah, I am home, going to work to pay for this. And she comes back and says, I'm in love with RJ. And I freak out. And, I had a mentor at the time. We'd go running around San Francisco, Golden Gate Park. And he would just run and he would just lecture me and give me viewpoints. And then he said the most amazing thing. He said, I don't know if she's really in love with RJ. I suspect she's in love with how she feels around RJ.
Yeah, like, distinguish that for us.
Oh. Okay, so we all impact each other, who we are. And sometimes there's certain people in your life that you just feel like a rock star with, or you feel sexy, or you feel smart. And then you come home to your partner and you feel safe and you feel nourished and you feel, whatever. So we feel different ways with different people. Because we're so egocentric, men are so egocentric and have to be the best, the most important, the MVP of the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, because we have to be the best at freaking everything, if our partner feels a certain way with someone else, we feel diminished, angry, jealous, and envious. So my mentor said, perhaps she's in love with the way she feels around RJ. And what I got in that moment was, it may or may not be true, but I saw how I was not at my fullest potential to be the man, to have her feel alive and have her feel sexy. I could actually learn from RJ to how to be that guy where she felt her genitals fully turned on around me. And so instead of me looking at RJ as the enemy, I started to be like, how can he be my ally for my greatness? The long story short is that she wasn't in love with RJ. She just fell in love with the feeling. And so our relationship went from that point. It was a really important distinction.
I'm silent and floored right now of the flip and the turnaround from RJ must die to
kill RJ.
I can actually learn what is it in this other human that my wife or partner is feeling, and how can I be part of that? That's high level stuff there, Robert.
Yeah, and I think where my mind goes is you must have had a practice of some kind that allowed you to stop that pattern of, I want to kill this man, but also at the same time, maybe feeling some shame or inadequacy for her not feeling that way around you at that particular point in time, and this other man being able to evoke that. So where had you been? And you write an entire section in your book about having a practice, right? To step into your excellence. Where were you What were the things that you were doing in that point in time that allowed you to actually push the pause button on seeing red, going ballistic, and then turning that into one of the most transcendent moments of your life?
Well, I have to add another piece to the puzzle to it. My back was against the wall. And what I mean by that is I realized I did not own Carol. She was not my possession.
Yeah. And
Carol could leave at any point, move up to the ranch in Northern California and leave me and be part of, RJ's harem, which authentically was a harem, which is another story. But she could do that. She could actually go and leave. And so there was a little desperation in there too. There wasn't like a magical, oh shit, my back is against the wall here. I have the opportunity to actually step up or I'm going to lose this woman. So just to add that piece to the puzzle. The main practice I had was I was in my $20,000 course. And so I had mentors and teachers. I had friends. I had a community to support me. And I had, from that moment of when we talked about the beginning, that story of that memory of, do you know your wife is crying? Do you know Carol's crying? I had a memory from there. And this was probably 18 months later, maybe 2 years later. So I still had the touch tone of that point. And I had told myself I wanted to learn what this was. So because I remembered the most embarrassing moment of my life to this really challenging moment, I said, I breathed. I stayed in my practice. I kept talking to my coach. I kept journaling like a madman. And I stayed in the fire. I leaned into the fire, to the discomfort, rather than bail. And then from that, my whole life opened up. I cannot express how far this road has been for me and how challenging, but I wake up every morning with passion and desire, with knowing Morgan, my second wife. I understand her. I understand a woman. That never happened to me before. But again, you have to lean into your practice and the uncomfortability because you never learn anything from inside your comfort zone. You learn everything from outside your comfort zone.
What's so important, though, about where you were when the shit hit the fan with, she comes home from her 2 weeks, I'm in love with the harem leader, is that you already had your support structure in place.
Yes.
Right? Like you had community, you had coaching, you had breath work, you had journaling. And the thing that we see most men, the trap that most men fall into is they wait for a situation like that. The wife comes home or the partner comes home and says, I'm in love with someone else. That's the first time that they step into any kind of support. And it's usually not enough. It's inadequate. I'm going to listen to a podcast. I'm going to read a book and I'm going to do this on my own because I should be able to figure this out on my own. And at that point, and we're actually, by the way, seeking those resources at a point in time where we're probably least capable, right? Like we're not seeing straight. We're not thinking straight because we're so emotionally wound up. And you had already been in deep practice. You'd already created the environment where when you were tested, you had so many different levers you could pull and resources and support you could lean on that allowed you to turn this into a story for you.
Exactly. I mean, I like to say people are moved by inspiration or desperation. You hear a podcast and then you move, or your wife comes and says, I'm cheating on you. And then you have to decide. So many couples I see is that at the divorce point where the wife's about to leave is when the guy wakes up and says, I need therapy or coaching. And sometimes that's way too late for a woman. She spent months or years saying, this isn't working for me. And the guy's like, it's fine. You have the house, you have the kids. And then the woman's like, I'm out of here. And that's happening more and more as women becoming more and more empowered. The point is that inspiration or desperation, I highly recommend if you're not fulfilled with your life, and some men are, very few, but some men are, if you're not 100% enchanted with your life, then feel the inspiration to make small micro changes to have the life you want. You can build simple practices like intermittent fast, which basically means I eat for 8 hours a day and I fast for 16 hours a day. So I eat from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. I've dropped weight. I feel more energy. It was like this little micro change. I basically skipped breakfast. It's not a big deal. And just from the magic of that, my whole weight has changed. So if you're not thrilled with something, investigate what's possible to have the life you actually want.
What you're committed to, it sounds like, is no matter the situation, no matter what's happening externally, that you're committed to curiosity.
Yes.
You're committed to looking into like, what is this? What could I be? What could I be better? You've given us a couple of examples already. And I'm curious, what is the payoff? Like, what has been the benefit in your life when you've made either macro changes or micro changes that other guys out there that may be feeling this uncomfortability could feel in their life at some point in the near future?
The main outcome is I like myself. Most men, if you truly ask them, don't. There's something wrong with them. I like myself. The second piece is my foundation is based on self-validation and self-esteem. Most people, but I'll stick with men. Most men are external validation junkies. We look externally to know that we're doing it right. Usually that's the woman. If we have a hot woman who's having sex with us, that must mean we're doing it right. If we have the job, the six-figure job, or the power position, or we have the car, or we have the stock return, or whatever, we have the external validation from others, that means we're doing it right. The problem with that is that means we're going every day to another gas tank and spending a lot of money cajoling or manipulating the validation from others. When you build your own self-esteem motor, and self-esteem is built upon esteemable acts, my 12-step program taught me that, self-esteem is built upon esteemable acts, then you no longer need to look externally for validation. It still comes and it still feels great, but you're no longer dependent on it. So those are the two outcomes in my life is like, I love my wife. I love spending every single day with her. She challenges me. She's beautiful. She's smart. And if she left because something else happened, or I would be okay. Knowing that, able to enjoy her more because I'm not dependent on her for sex, energy, or attention.
There was a point in time in my life, if you asked me that question, like, do you, Brian, have self-esteem? Do you like yourself? I would have said, beyond a shadow of a doubt, absolutely, Robert. Like, I am awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have been total bullshit.
Right.
And so I'm curious for guys, what are the indicators that you see in other men that you work with that signals to you, you actually don't like yourself that much?
Yeah, great question.
You watch. When coaching, watch. So people say a lot of things. People talk a lot. Men talk too much, by the way. Practice brevity, please. But really, it's just like you watch the guy and look at his behaviors. You look at the self-demeaning behaviors. You look at just how he goes to the well of a woman to feel good about himself. You just listen. And then as a coach, deliberately, sometimes fiercely, depending on the relationship, I say to him, do you see this behavior? Do you notice this thing? It's very hard. And that's the importance of having external vision on top of you. So like a coach, a therapist, a teacher, a men's group, a 12-step program, where you can invite external reflection. It's very hard to see your own foibles. It's very hard to see these parts of yourself. And so someone who you enroll to be a friend, an accountability buddy, whatever, to help you raise to mastery is really important. And so that's what I do. I'm like, just notice this behavior. Do you see this unconscious way you're self-sabotaging, this unconscious way you're self-flagellating? There's just a way you can point this out. And when men really confront it, take it out of the shadow into the light, there's a lot of truth and expansion that can happen.
I think that ties back to the title of your book, right? Which is about unhidden. And I want you to define that for us. Like what does it mean to be unhidden and why is that important? And I think about, Brian, I would have answered the question the exact same way that you would have 6 or 7 years ago, which is, yeah, of course, I love myself. It would have been a knee-jerk response. But then in my private life, in my hidden life, I was incessantly sex messaging women because anytime I felt a moment of isolation or loneliness or overwhelm, it was just let me pop on my phone and ping 10 women who at least one of them will get back to me and engage in some sort of sexual discourse that made me feel alive. I never would have equated that to not loving myself or not really liking myself. I hated the idea of being alone. Mm-hmm. And there are other men who they become workaholics. They emotionally eat, they drink too much, they gamble too much. And because it's become such a deep part of your DNA, you actually cease to see that as not liking yourself. Those are our numbing mechanisms and they become secret parts of your life. So Robert, I'd be really curious to know what is your definition of unhidden and what are the consequences of it and why is it so important that we bring ourselves into the light?
We all hide something. Some of us hide a lot. Most of us hide a significant portion of who we are. I hide. I don't say anything to everyone. There's still things I should tell Morgan. It is part of the human dynamic. I mean, in my brain, the 1 million thoughts I have a day, how many of those can actually relate to my wife for the 2 hours or 3 hours we spend every evening in relationship and connecting. So let's be realistic. Everyone hides something. And there are certain things that we hide that creates distance between you and the people you want to be intimate with. Now, I lie all the time because I don't want to be intimate with those people. It's a deliberate choice. I don't care if they know me. For the people I want to know me, my intimate friends, my intimate relations, I know the things about me that are causing impact, that are causing distance. Those are the things I recommend to build a practice. First, discovering yourself, and then to relate to your intimate friends so you no longer have to hide. There's so much energy we put into wearing these masks, to wearing these facades. There's so much energy we put into looking cool or looking good that's killing us. And so unHidden is about deliberately seeing, understanding, and then building a practice of relating so you could actually be seen. And if you want to be intimate with someone, you have to take the gooeyest, the biggest fetishes, the darkest, the things you're most embarrassed about, and you have to stand in front of that person. You got to open up your heart. You have to expose it and say, this is who I am. Do you want to be with this person? Do you want to see this person? And if they say no and they leave, you have to be grateful that they left, because if they don't want to see these intimate parts of you, then that's not an optimal relationship. That's a mediocre relationship. But to have the courage to know, the self-esteem to know that you'll be best off if you are living in integrity, vulnerability, transparency, that's what it means to be unhidden.
You're making me think of a couple that I saw. Their names are John and Missy Butcher, who are in their early 50s.
Yeah.
You know
I
them?
Yeah.
I mean, beautiful human beings. They look like they're in their early 40s. They have one of the deepest, most loving relationships. They have admiration for one another. And I think they own businesses that like are billion-dollar businesses.
Yeah.
And I remember John and Missy sitting on a stage together where they once said, you know, if you want the kind of intimacy that we have, then you have to undergo this process of revealing all of your deepest fantasies, right? The deepest desires you have, layer by layer. Like start with the low-hanging fruit, like the ones that maybe are a little bit uncomfortable, and share it with one another. But as like you build that trust, like ongoing, if every stone is left you leave no stone left unturned, then you hit the bottom. And this person now knows everything about you, you and them. There are no more hidden places. And intimacy, from what Esther Perel talks about, the brilliant author and therapist, she says intimacy is about closeness. And if there's anything in the way, like the things you're talking about, right, which are hidden things, then there's something that misses. So what is that? Can you give some of our listeners, let's say men who are interested in beginning that process, and can you give them some things to do to start, and also some maybe beware moments to not go too fast and like to avoid those moments?
First thing I would do is, if you're not a journal writer or you don't do self-reflection, I think that's a major impact. I had a colleague that said, if you go outside and talk to the lamppost for 15 minutes a day, your life would improve. You just go out and just speak to the lamppost, right? Because you're generating thoughts and you're speaking, you're free thinking. If you're not a writer, get a voice recorder and record, on your phone, 5 minutes a day. Just do a stream of consciousness. Or if you're a visual, just use art. But just have some way to take what's in your brain, inside your cortex, and lay it out in front of you. So I'm a big journaler, and I keep a book with me at all times. I'll write down for 5 minutes. Sometimes I write for an hour of the thoughts inside of you. That's first. The second is to find some way to be seen by another human being. That could be by a coach. That could be by a therapist. It could be by a 12-step group. But you need to have another human being your witness. There's no excuses anymore. I don't care where you live or what kind of people. We have Facebook. We have Meetup. We have all these places where you could get out of your own shell and into the world and connect to other human beings. So just know that's out there. It's just no more excuses anymore. And the third is to start to create goals for yourself. Men like games, right? So what do you want to get better at? I want to get better at communication. I want to get better at intimacy. I was really interested in body language and learning about body language. Create a game for yourself or practice how to get better. These 3 steps are what I often recommend. And then when you want to go deeper, well, there's more intense games to create. But that's really where I recommend men start. You can't go from bad to better. You can only go from bad to good. And when you're at good, then you can go to better. Then your better becomes your good. And then there's a new level of better, right? Like you climb one mountain, it kicks your butt, you get to the top, and then you're like, okay, where's the next mountain to climb? Most people, when they think about the parts of themselves they're not proud of, they live in the bad. They live in I'm wrong. I'm not attractive enough. I'm overweight. I'm watching too much porn. I could never get the woman I wanted, right? We stick in that self-flagellating bad. And I can tell you, society actually enforces you to be like, yeah, hang on the bad to buy more products. But like, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad. We live in this society of disapproval. And so the most important thing I like to tell men on their journey is this very simple thing. You're doing it right. You're a good man. You're doing it right. You're a good man. If you can stay in the good, then you can get to the better. So if you can just reframe everything you think about yourself as wrong, if you can reframe it that you're right and I want to do it better, your whole life, your whole experience will change. And so just start from good.
Awesome. Fellas, for those of you listening, and actually for our robust female audience, you got to go out and get the book, unHidden, a book for men and those confused by them. And one of the sections of the book that I really appreciate at the end, Robert, is the section you wrote specifically for those confused by men. Mm-hmm. And you have 6 concepts in the back there. I think it's 6 concepts.
Yes.
Where you really, truly have a provocative conversation with women too, right? I think there's a line in here. Let me see if I can pull this out real quick. You make a plea to women, or it's actually more of a directive that says, it's time to stop emasculating men because you are afraid of their reactions. Mm-hmm. And I really love this. Maybe you can put some context around that for us, maybe just to wrap this section. But I think it's important for women to know that there is a call for them to understand where maybe they've co-created the environment, the dynamic they have with their men in their lives.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the patriarchy has been around about 6,000 years, but I can tell you all genders co-created that patriarchy. All genders continue to foster the patriarchy, and all genders are being negatively impacted by the patriarchy. The more women blame men for what is, the less chance of healing there is. I'm not saying men are innocent in any shape or form. I'm just saying everyone's played a part. And every time a woman lies to a man to save his ego or to keep things safe or keep the status quo, you make him dumber. And so I tell women a few things in this modern age. One is your anger is right, the hurt is right, and set the bar of what you need in a relationship for a man to climb to. Do never minimize yourself. And that often includes telling the truth with permission, with consent in the container, but tell men the hard truth so they can become better men, or your relationship will stay the same. I guarantee it.
Oh man, Robert, that resonates with me. I love that. Dominic and I talk often about the women in our lives who have been our greatest teachers and have really set the course for our life and our direction. So they are amazing teachers, and I love it. I love it when women set that standard.
Great. I'm so grateful for the women in my life. I mean, the book really was co-created by my wife, Morgan. It was her. And I say that in the dedication, that it's my name on the book, but that was a co-creation. All concepts have been enhanced by her telling me the truth, enhancing my relationship. So grateful for the power.
Robert, the next thing we're going to do is we'll interview your wife, Morgan, and see if all this checks out. Yeah, we'll see all of this. We'll see how Robert really puts it into play.
Yeah. She actually might love that. You can have a good set there.
I love it.
So grab the book on Amazon. It's called unHidden. And Robert, if there's someone who's been inspired and wants to do work with you, what are the options?
Really just set up a private consultation with me. We have a few options currently, mostly, to be honest, on the high-end spectrum. But I do have colleagues also like-minded if I'm not a good fit. But you can go to robertkandell.com and contact me, robert@kandellconsulting.com. You can just contact me. I'm glad to set up a session and chat. Even if we're not going to work together, I'm glad to be of value, give reflection. It's a pleasure. So please reach out.
Awesome. We'll link that in the show notes. Robert, thank you again for being our guest, and more importantly, for the work you're doing with men and the women of the world. We salute you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Robert.
Hey, if you dug this episode, how about dropping us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts? It'll take you no more than a few seconds, and every rating helps us to build credibility with potential new listeners. And the more listeners we have, the more amazing guests that we can attract and bring on the show for you. So head over to Apple Podcasts, drop us a rating and review. And by the way, thank you.